My CEO fired me after 20 years for no reason. My silent revenge made him lose everything. The digital notification, a sterile, almost apologetic chime, arrived precisely at 9:07 a.m. It wasn't unexpected, not really. In the chilling silence of my home office, I watched the cursor blink over the subject line, Important Human Resources Update. Thorne Sterling, the architect of this impending upheaval, had delivered the news to me face-to-face just moments ago, his words a dismissive wave of the hand, an empty flourish of corporate jargon that felt like a slap. Strategic restructuring, he'd called it. Optimizing resources, he declared, his gaze skimming past me as if I were a ghost already, a mere inconvenience to his grand vision. 20 years. 2 decades of my life, my intellect, my very essence poured into the sinews and veins of this company, painstakingly built and maintained, now reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet, an overhead expense to be coldly eliminated. Yet, as he spoke, detailing my immediate severance and the swift transition of my responsibilities, to whom, he couldn't quite articulate, I felt nothing akin to the fiery rage or despair one might expect. Instead, a peculiar, almost prophetic calm settled over me, a quiet, almost serene understanding of the catastrophe he was unknowingly unleashing. I remember the glint in his eye, a reflection of the harsh morning sun piercing the absurdly large windows of his corner office. He was a man who reveled in appearances, in sweeping gestures and grand pronouncements, a performance artist in the corporate theater. Thorne Sterling, the new CEO, had arrived like a hurricane, all bluster and disruption, utterly convinced that the key to profitability lay in severing the old guard, the legacy systems, the very foundations he barely comprehended. He saw me, Lorcan, Chief Strategic Systems Specialist, as an anachronism, a holdover from a bygone era of meticulous detail and invisible labor. To him, I was simply a bloated cost, a salary that could be rerouted to a flashier, more innovative department. He believed, truly believed, that he was winning. He believed he had excised a dead limb, making the organism leaner, more agile. And for a fleeting moment, as he gestured towards the door, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. He had no idea just how profoundly, catastrophically wrong he was. He had no idea what he had truly done. Because what he had cut wasn't a dead limb, a superfluous appendage. It was the spinal cord, the unseen network of nerves that coordinated every single function, every impulse, every vital beat of this colossal corporate body. He thought he was declaring victory, but what he had actually done was trigger a slow, agonizing, self-inflicted demise. And I, the man he had just discarded, was the only one who truly understood the intricate, catastrophic dance that had just begun. To truly understand what unfolded, one must first comprehend the journey that led me to that pivotal moment in Thorne Sterling's office. For 20 years, I had been the silent architect, the unseen hand guiding the intricate machinery of this company. When I started, fresh out of university with a passion for complex systems, the company was a burgeoning enterprise, its nascent systems a chaotic tangle of ad hoc solutions and manual workarounds. My role, evolving over time, became less about building new things and more about ensuring the old ones worked, about making the disparate parts communicate, about foreseeing failures and patching them before they even registered on anyone else's radar. I was the Chief Strategic Systems Specialist, a title that sounded grand on paper but effectively meant I was the chief problem solver, the institutional memory, the human firewall against myriad operational catastrophes. It was a burden I bore with quiet pride, a dedication that often felt like a solitary vigil. My days were a symphony of quiet corrections, a constant dance on the edge of chaos. A misaligned data stream from the manufacturing floor to inventory? I knew the obscure legacy code that caused it and could patch it in minutes. A supply chain hiccup due to an unaddressed vendor payment system glitch from 2008? I had the workaround, the backdoor entry, the manual override no one else remembered existed. Our product delivery system, prone to breaking down under peak load? I had built a series of redundant, undocumented scripts that kicked in during high traffic periods, rerouting demands and balancing loads. A digital duct tape and baling wire solution that had saved us millions in potential losses and kept our customers satisfied without anyone ever knowing the precariousness of the underlying system. I wasn't just fixing things, I was connecting them. I was the human API, bridging gaps between departments, between outdated software and new, between fragmented processes and a semblance of seamless operation. My office, cluttered with decades of schematics and old system diagrams, was less a workspace and more a control center for a labyrinthine digital ecosystem. It was a world only I truly inhabited. I preferred to work in the background, a silent guardian. I didn't crave accolades or corner offices. My satisfaction came from seeing the company run smoothly, from knowing that my obscure knowledge and quick interventions prevented daily chaos. But this quiet dedication came at a cost, a deep, pervasive weariness. Family dinners were often interrupted by urgent calls, the disappointment in my children's eyes a familiar ache. Weekends dissolved into emergency troubleshooting sessions, leaving me isolated and drained. I saw colleagues rise through the ranks, chasing promotions and power, their paths diverging sharply from my own, while I remained in my niche, the invaluable, yet largely invisible, bedrock. I had a few apprentices over the years, bright young minds, but the sheer volume and complexity of the undocumented systems meant that no one person could ever truly grasp the full scope of what I managed. It was too vast, too interconnected, too organic in its growth. And therein lay my secret weapon, though I hadn't consciously forged it as such. It was the very essence of my unique, unquantifiable value. My secret weapon wasn't a premeditated act of malice, but rather a meticulous, almost obsessive habit born of necessity and foresight. Years ago, I had begun to catalog everything, not in the company's official, often outdated, documentation systems. No, I created my own. I saw the fragility of our vast, patchwork infrastructure. I understood that the company's real operational flow was not what was written in manuals, but what was executed through a series of subtle, intuitive, often undocumented interactions between systems, codes, and human processes. I logged every obscure connection, every critical workaround, every invisible thread that held our operational fabric together. I created a personal, highly detailed, cross-referenced log of every undocumented patch, every crucial bypass, every hidden dependency that I had implemented or discovered over 2 decades. It was more than a log. It was a digital map of the company's true circulatory system, a living, breathing blueprint of its hidden vulnerabilities and vital connections, accessible only by me and secured by layers of encryption and my own unique logic. I did this not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated professional responsibility, a quiet insurance policy against the inevitable day when the old systems would finally collapse, or when a new, ignorant leader might make a rash decision. I suppose, in a way, I had always known that my peculiar value was invisible until it was gone. Then Thorne Sterling arrived. He was everything I was not: loud, ostentatious, obsessed with metrics that glowed on a screen but bore little resemblance to the gritty reality of our operations. He bought the company, a leverage buyout that left us swimming in debt, or so the whispers went. He spoke of lean methodology and disruptive innovation, terms that meant little to me beyond a vague, unsettling threat to the stable equilibrium I had so carefully maintained. Our first interaction was brief, dismissive on his part. He asked about my role, and I explained the critical nature of our legacy systems, the delicate balance of our supply chain, the necessity of my constant, invisible oversight. He nodded absently, his eyes already drifting to his phone. "We'll be looking to modernize heavily, Lorcan," he'd said, his voice laced with an impatience he barely bothered to conceal. "Streamline redundant positions." From that moment, a chilling certainty settled in my gut. I knew my days were numbered. I also knew that he had no comprehension of what redundant truly meant in a system as complex as ours. He saw the quiet cog, not the central pillar. And so, in the quiet solitude of my office, I continued to refine my personal database, adding more layers of detail, more cross-references, not as a weapon, but as a meticulous testament to what was about to be lost. My calm understanding during his severance speech wasn't resignation. It was the quiet confidence of a man who knew the true, incalculable value of what he possessed, and the catastrophic, almost tragic ignorance of the man who chose to discard it. The quiet hum of my laptop was the only sound in my home office as I watched the unfolding chaos. Thorne Sterling had announced my departure with a flourish, a company-wide email about streamlining operations and new strategic directions. He had even held a small, obligatory meeting where he spoke of tough but necessary decisions and agility. The immediate aftermath was, predictably, nothing. A few colleagues, the select few who understood the depth of my silent work, offered sympathetic glances, some quiet words of concern. Most, however, were too busy trying to decipher Thorne's torrent of new corporate directives, reorganizing their own teams, or simply adjusting to the sudden power vacuum. Thorne, from his lofty perch of delusion, undoubtedly interpreted this initial calm as validation. He saw my quiet exit as graceful, perhaps even a sign of my understanding of his superior vision. He was wrong. He always was. My plan, if you could call it that, was less about doing something and more about not doing everything. It was a strategy of strategic inaction, of allowing the natural order of things to reassert itself once the constant, invisible corrections I provided were removed. For 2 decades, I had been the diligent gardener, meticulously pruning the weeds of dysfunction before they could take root. Now, I simply stepped back and allowed them to bloom, to choke the very life out of the garden. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed by the uninitiated. A minor delay in processing a batch of components from a key supplier. A slight hiccup in the internal transfer of customer data between sales and fulfillment. These were the kinds of issues I would have identified and rectified within minutes, often before anyone else even noticed them. Now, they lingered, festering like unseen wounds. Someone in purchasing might notice the delay, send an email, get a vague response. The fulfillment team might find a customer order missing a piece of crucial information, leading to a manual override and a maddening lag. Thorne, blinded by his own rhetoric, busy with his grand pronouncements and sparkling PowerPoint presentations, was oblivious. He was focused on the big wins, the transformative initiatives, not the insidious, granular decay that was beginning to fester at the very heart of the company's operations. Then came the calls. Not to me, of course, but within the company. Whispers in the hallways escalated to frantic emails circulating between departments. Anyone know why the new inventory system isn't syncing with the old warehouse management software? It's throwing up errors. Who handles the legacy data migration for historical sales figures? It's completely off, and we can't reconcile anything. These were questions that, for years, had been answered by a single name, mine. Now, there was no answer. Thorne had tasked various department heads with taking over my responsibilities, distributing pieces of the puzzle without understanding how they fit together or even that a complete puzzle existed. He assigned complex system oversight to an IT manager whose expertise lay in network security, not the delicate ballet of operational flow. He delegated supply chain integration to a logistics specialist who understood transportation but not the intricate digital handshake required for real-time tracking and reordering. They floundered, diligently working within their limited understanding, but completely missing the invisible threads that I had meticulously woven over 2 decades. I received a few calls from former colleagues, tentative at first, their voices tinged with desperation. Hey Lorcan, quick question. Remember that issue with the Q3 reports linking to the old CRM? It's happening again. Any idea what fixed it back then? I would listen patiently, calmly, a silent observer of their growing panic. Ah yes, I would say, my voice even. That feature was designed to only run on a specific legacy server configuration, and there was a manual override script I used to apply if the primary sync failed. But that was all part of the old system's peculiarities. I'm sure the new team will find a modern solution. My answers were always truthful, always professional, and always, utterly, unhelpful to their immediate crisis. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I simply stated facts, knowing that the context, the crucial how and why, was locked away in my mind and my meticulously documented, inaccessible to them files. Weeks turned into a month. The subtle issues metastasized. Production lines experienced unscheduled downtimes because the automated ordering system, which I had secretly maintained and optimized, failed to trigger reorders for critical components. Supply chain delays became chronic as the complex, interconnected web of international logistics, held together by my unofficial, real-time adjustments, began to fray and snap. Customer complaints surged like a tsunami. Orders were wrong, deliveries were late, and the once seamless experience the company provided evaporated into a frustrating morass of errors and apologies. The internal communication systems, once reliable due to my constant debugging of their ancient underpinnings, became unstable, crashing at critical moments, isolating departments further in their despair. The whispers turned into shouts. The frantic emails became panicked, all-caps exchanges. Thorne, initially oblivious, then irritated, began to get defensive, his carefully constructed facade cracking under the strain. He called emergency meetings, his voice strained, blaming external factors, unforeseen market shifts, employee complacency. He fired a middle manager, then another, convinced they were the source of the inefficiency, his flailing attempts at control only deepening the chaos. "We just need better leadership," he'd bellow in town halls, completely missing that the leadership wasn't the problem. It was the very foundations he had so recklessly destabilized. He still saw my absence as a cost-saving, a triumph, a decisive stroke of genius. He was still too busy admiring the shine on his new, empty empire to notice the cracks spreading rapidly through its very foundations, the sound of its impending collapse deafened by his own ego. And I, from my quiet vantage point, merely observed, the calm strategist watching a chess game unfold exactly as I had predicted, pawn by pawn, piece by piece. The silence of my revenge was deafening, its effects becoming undeniably catastrophic for everyone but the one person who stubbornly refused to hear it. The company's annual shareholder meeting had always been a meticulously orchestrated performance, a grand display of corporate stability. Past years saw it as a celebration of growth, a testament to steady, albeit quiet, success. This year, however, the air in the grand ballroom was thick with a palpable tension, a nervousness that permeated even the meticulously arranged floral displays. The financial reports, distributed moments before Thorne Sterling took the stage, were a stark, undeniable testament to the rapidly accelerating decline of the company's fortunes. Revenue projections had plummeted, operational costs had inexplicably surged, and the stock price had entered a freefall, shedding nearly half its value in mere weeks. The scent of fear and impending doom hung heavy in the air. Thorne, despite the grim numbers, still tried to exude confidence, a desperate, almost pathetic act. He strode to the podium, a forced smile plastered on his face, his gaze sweeping across the rows of increasingly agitated shareholders, grim-faced board members, and what remained of the company's upper management. He began, his voice echoing slightly in the grand hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand concerns may exist. These are challenging times, but I assure you, we are implementing aggressive strategies to course correct. We are streamlining, we are modernizing, we are cutting out inefficiencies, eliminating deadweight." He paused, his eyes briefly flicking towards an empty chair in the front row, a silent nod to my absence, a symbolic pat on his own back for what he considered his decisive, brilliant action. He was still convinced that my removal was a benefit, not a catastrophe. His ignorance was a gilded cage, trapping him in his own delusion. It was during the Q&A session that the facade finally began to crack, shattering into a million pieces. A longtime shareholder, a stern woman with an unshakable gaze and a formidable presence, rose, clutching a stack of damning papers. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice cutting through the polite murmurs like a scalpel, "our supply chains are in disarray. Our customer satisfaction scores have cratered, and profits, once consistent, have evaporated. You speak of modernization, yet our core systems appear to be failing daily. What specifically, beyond vague promises, is being done to address these fundamental breakdowns?" Thorne stammered, attempting to deflect, to blame the complexity of global markets or unforeseen technical glitches, his usual corporate jargon now sounding hollow and pathetic. But the questions kept coming, each one sharper, more pointed, chipping away at his composure. A board member, his face etched with profound worry and barely contained fury, leaned into the microphone. "We've had multiple critical system failures in the last month, Mr. Sterling. The new IT team seems utterly unable to identify the root causes. We're told these are legacy system issues. What exactly are these issues, and why were they not addressed before now? Who was responsible for managing these critical foundations?" That was my cue. I had been sitting quietly in the back, an invited guest by a sympathetic, albeit powerless, board member who knew the truth, or at least suspected the terrifying extent of it. I rose slowly, calmly, my presence barely registering at first amid the growing cacophony of questions and Thorne's increasingly flustered, desperate responses. My former colleague, the board member, recognized my signal. "Perhaps," he interjected, his voice firm and clear, commanding attention, "Mr. Lorcan, who spent 2 decades intimately familiar with these legacy systems, could shed some light." All eyes, heavy with anxiety and curiosity, turned to me. Thorne's head snapped up, his forced smile replaced by a look of bewildered annoyance, then a flicker of recognition, followed by a deeper, unsettling dread. Lorcan, he scoffed, a desperate attempt to regain control. He was a former employee. His knowledge is outdated. We've moved beyond that. He's irrelevant. I ignored him, walking deliberately towards a microphone set up for audience questions. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, measured, carrying a quiet weight, an undeniable authority that Thorne's never had. Indeed, Mr. Sterling, I was a former employee, but my knowledge, while perhaps outdated in your view, was precisely what kept these systems operational for so long. I paused, letting my words sink in, the Zygarnik effect doing its work, drawing every ear, every eye, every desperate hope for an answer. For 20 years, I was the chief strategic systems specialist. My role was to understand not just the official, documented architecture of this company's operational systems, but the hidden, critical interdependencies, the undocumented patches, the manual workarounds for obsolete code, the invisible threads connecting disparate databases, supply chain software, manufacturing lines, and customer service platforms. These were the true foundations. Not glamorous, not visible on a spreadsheet, but absolutely vital, the very lifeblood of this company. Thorne opened his mouth to interrupt, a frantic, desperate protest forming on his lips, but I continued, my gaze fixed not on him, but on the silent, tense faces of the shareholders, painting a picture of his profound miscalculation. When a system developed a critical bug 15 years ago that would have crippled our inventory, I wrote an emergency script that nobody else ever needed to know about because it ran silently in the background, correcting the data flow every hour. When our primary shipping software became incompatible with a new international